today's topic is the role of experiences in learning, and we have three people on the panel. We have Radha Gopalan, who's been an educator for a long time now. She's taught at Rishi Valley School. She continues to teach at Azim Premji University, and by background, she's an environmental scientist. So a lot of experience with experiential learning. And we have Sukanya Sinha, who's a physicist. She teaches at Indian Statistical Institute in Bangalore, and she's also been part of, she founded an organization called Curiosity, which was offering experiential science learning activities. She's been working with us at GenWise for a few years now. And Soumya, who is a Montessorian, she has a background in engineering, but over the last, I think, more than 15 years, she's been with in the space of education, trained in Montessori techniques, taught at a very interesting Montessori school in Bangalore called Namashale, and after that she was teaching it all. Yes, all of these people have been involved with GenWise's experiential learning programs, whether it is in summer camps or school tours to Auroville and so on. So without much ado, we will get started with today's topic. And my first question to the panelists is really to sort of get some sense of what does experiential learning mean to them, because this term experiential learning is used rather widely and in different contexts. So it would be good to get a sense of what it means to each of them. So Radha, would you like to start off?
Sure, yeah. Morning, everybody. Nice to see a few familiar faces, not faces so much as names as well. So let's get a better understanding, I think, of what we mean by experiences in learning or experiential learning. And this is going to be from my own experience of, engaging in this process. So first, when we talk about experiences in learning or experiential learning, really life is one big experience, and it's very wide ranging. This when we talk about experiences, it could range from a good conversation to doing something with your hands, to actually immersing yourself completely in an environment. So it's this very wide range that we go through in life, in which there are many experiences through which we learn. Now, so there are different ways of, building knowledge or cognition. One is, of course, through reading and, learning about something theoretically. But here what we're talking about really is learning through the process of doing, right? But when we say learning by doing, it's a very simplistic way of talking about it, because really what goes into experiential learning, in my experience, is that you're physically and emotionally, you're engaged with, whether it's an object or a subject or an environment or, whatever it is. So there's a direct relationship with whatever you are sort of studying or engaging with. And again, it's not just about the activity or about the doing, okay? But the real learning from any experience, it comes from, from reflecting on what that experience is, and then abstracting from it, and then going back to the process. So it's a kind of it's a very cyclic feedback loop sort of a process. And, as an adult, educator, parent, whatever, it's so important to structure it in that way. So when we talk about experiential learning, it's not merely the activity, but it is a process which actually has to be structured to make the learning meaningful. I think I'll stop here, Vishnu, because we'll have both Soumya and Sukanya.
Yeah. So if Soumya,
so
Sukanya,
can I
both of you
jump in?
Yeah,
can I jump in here, Sukanya?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, I completely agree with Radha was saying. Definitely, this whole engagement level is the yardstick. And coming from a Montessori background, I'd just like to add one other facet, which is that the different phases that children go through are more conducive to different kinds of experiences and different things to do with those experiences. So when they're very little, the more sensorial experiences they have and the more one helps them make sense of it, the more trusting and the more engaged is their approach to the world. And then when they're a little older, this is what we would call the elementary age group, from 6, 7 to whatever, 11, 12. Then the engagement needs to be physical and outdoor and intellectual and asking questions and making connections and sowing seeds of interest, and questioning, and also looking at moral issues, what is right, what is wrong, seeing shades of gray. So the experiences are like Radha said at the beginning. I mean, life is one big experience. That's all it is. But because the windows for absorbing are slightly different at different age groups, it's good to be, I think, aware that some kinds of experiences and some kinds of inputs, we'll talk about that later today. I think some kinds of inputs from the adults facilitate the richness of the experience more, and the takeaway for the child from the experience more, and the permanency of their experience substantially can be changed by how the adult there sort of responds to the child and the experience. That's my sort of early sort of comment. Yeah, Sukanya, you can.
Yeah, so I think I agree with both what Radha and Sonia are saying. They have much more experience with directly teaching younger children. I do have some experience with middle school children, but I think like one of the key things, of course, experiential learning has become a buzzword, and it has a wide range of implications, and of course, even when a child touches a hot plate and realizes, withdraws its hand, that is a form of experiential learning without attaching that name to it. But I think the primary thing about experiential learning to me is that it's an experience in a book or a textbook. You are reading about something that somebody else has seen and being told about it. Whereas this is something you directly through your senses. It's a one-on-one experience. It's a personal thing, and you draw your conclusions from, you start getting, because you start believing in your direct experiences and drawing conclusions from it. It gives you a different perspective altogether, as opposed to learning from the textbooks. I'm not saying that learning from the textbooks doesn't have any value, but this has a different kind of value, and this gives the children a different kind of confidence and an eagerness to explore, eagerness to observe, and the role of the adults is to not suppress that, saying that your observation is right or wrong, or this is the way you should be doing it. There should be gentle guidance, but freedom to explore and draw conclusions from their own experiences. Encourage that a lot. Yeah. So I think that's.
Yeah. So that's quite interesting, and we were talking about this earlier in the run-up to this session, and we spoke about how there may be two children or two students doing experiments, say in the physics laboratory or in some lab, and though on the face of it, it appears to be an experience, it is not necessary that it is experiential learning for both. So one is maybe allowing experience to be the primary driver and respecting the observations which come out, and maybe one, because of the system, placing a very high premium on marks and exams and so on, one is saying, hey, I took these 3 readings, they're supposed to fit this line, so I will make up the other readings. So it would help if maybe Sukanya and Radha, if both of you could share an example of what constitutes experiential learning for you, and talk a bit about why is it important. You already said that learning from textbooks is important, but what is about experiential learning which cannot happen through textbooks? How does it complement it, or what does it provide that other forms of learning cannot?
So, Kanya, do you want to go ahead? Yeah.
Okay.
And then I'll-
So I want to give like three sort of direct experiences of my own, share anecdotal stories, and one is about my own experience as a child. One is about what I observed in another school, and the third is how I thought I was involved in teaching. What I take away from that. So my experience, one of the very important experiences I had was that when I was in first grade, 6 years old, I studied in first grade in a school in California. And we had this activity of, we're doing very low grade maths and all that, but we had this activity where we actually traveled, the whole class traveled to a farm, brought back a black hen. See, it's been so long and I still remember the color. That how deep the experience is. So with, I don't know, like lots of eggs, and stationed them in our classroom, in a corner of our classroom, and she sat on the eggs for whichever many days out there. And and we took care of the hen, and there was a book called From Egg to Chick. And every 4 or 5 days or 3 days, we would break one egg. In retrospect, it's kind of cruel, but it's like a form of learning. And see, how the embryo has developed. And from that, we knew that it was 21 days it takes an egg to hatch. And strangely enough, it was 6 years, when I was 6 years old, and I'm 62 now. And I remember that number 21. It was amazing, like so many things happened after that. And that number, if I had learned from a textbook, I think I made many numbers that would have gotten lost. But this was, I knew like every few days we were breaking the egg, and this was happening. And on the 21st days, we found that I think probably the hen was stressed or something like that. So things were not going as planned, so-called. But we built an incubator with Christmas lights in the class. And one day we came, on the 21st day, we came to class and we found like the chicks had hatched. So, that's just like, etched in my mind. And then all of us wrote about the experience, illustrated, each child, took a piece, put it all together. And it was just like, it was stuck in my mind. So that I think that direct experience and my observation of how, it's stuck in my mind through years goes to show that this has a great value. Great value and great importance of that direct interaction. Okay, so the second thing is, I was an undergraduate in Chandigarh, but so Tagore thought about this experiential learning like way ahead of time without giving it this label or name. And that's because, there was no need to have a separate experiential learning class. I mean, the whole experiential learning was completely integrated into what was done in school. And the idea was, his philosophy was really, you be one with nature and the community, observe, what's your environment keenly, and the community around you, be it the tribals or the village living around you, all of that. So that was all the children were doing that all through every day. There was no separate class like that. Classes were outside. And of course, I was an undergraduate. This was in school. And that showed they used to have this literary meets for every child, every group, so called the Sahitya Sabha, where children presented their own work. And unlike a Calcutta school where, you know, in the literature classes or whatever you write, you get more marks when you write flowery language or you quote, you know, like well-known poets and all that. So this child got up and very confidently, and in Shantiniketan, in winter, migratory birds used to come and the lake used to be like dark with, you know, like full of birds. So he talked about these birds, these geese that came, and he didn't know that where they came from. He didn't say they came from Siberia, so on and so forth. He said, you know, he talked about their color. He knew their approximate weight, how they took off in the evening, how they came, the patterns they made in the sky. And it was amazing. It was all his own language. And he had so much confidence because he had seen it, observed it himself. And the whole literature presentation took a completely, and it was a direct product of this experiential learning. And I think that's very important. Okay, I don't know whether I should talk about my curiosity experience or hand it over to Radha, because we can come back again. Or Vishnu, what do you say? Should I?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should I pass it on to Radha, or do add on my curiosity experience?
Yeah.
I don't know how the
Yeah.
time is.
Why don't you share your curiosity experience?
Okay. So this.
It's okay. Just in a couple of minutes, share the curiosity experience. We'll go over to Radha. Yeah.
Okay. So the curiosity experience is when we, a group of us, were involved in this organization called Curiosity, where we worked with middle school children. And it was like outside the school curriculum over weekends and all that. So the refreshing thing about working with middle school children was they knew very little, you know, so all the experiences were new and they were not afraid to draw conclusions from that, you know, that they were not afraid to be wrong because they didn't know what it was all about, you know. And one thing about these experiential learning programs, I feel, is to have confidence, as I said, confidence in observations. And if you have a preconceived notion, to accept counterintuitive findings. So what we ask them to do is to build a pendulum and from a length of string, hang a potato, tomato, whatever, piece of, whatever they felt like, a rock and all that, and find the swing time period. So they'd never studied the pendulum, you know. If it had been 9th standard, they would know it's like twice pi square root of L over G. These guys didn't know anything. So they did all that. They picked all their own things and had looked at it, and they came running. Said, Auntie, there's something going on. Something's wrong. Every time, whatever we put out there, we're getting the same swing time, you know, like what's happening? It shouldn't the heavier be, give a slower swing time? So I said, you just keep doing it. And they did it over and over and over again. And they found that whatever they put out there, it's giving the same to believe. They sort of discovered on their own that, you know, like this is what we did and this is what we are finding. So that must be true. So, so I think that's a very important thing, because if you're already told in class that this is independent of mass, it just doesn't sink in the same way this struck them. So I think, so with that, I'll hand it over to Radha.
Yeah, thanks.
So Radha,
yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So Sukanya has, I think, very evocatively talked about how these experiences create an emotional connect and they sink in and they remain with you for such a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe if you can help us understand this in a little more detail as to, so what is happening in experiential learning, and there are so many things in the curriculum, right? And there's so much to be learned. Mm-hmm. So what is the role experiential learning plays? Because I really doubt if one can learn all the things one is required to, say, by grade 10 or 12 or whatever through experience. So what is its role? Maybe in the mainstream classroom and maybe generally for human development.
Mm-hmm. Tall order that, Vishnu, but let me attempt a couple of things. Yeah. I think it's always nice to just give a couple of examples so that one is not talking in, you know, sort of in an abstract sort of a frame. So let me take two examples. One I would take of a mainstream school, and this was a government school where very close to where I used to live, and where some of us spent a fair bit of our time. And this was, particularly the biology teachers were very heavily loaded with the course, with having to complete the syllabus, etc., etc. And the government had something called a biodiversity day. So, during which they had to, children had to put up an exhibition of sorts, etc. Now, such deep conditioning for all of us, particularly in the teaching environment, there is such deep conditioning of, if it's biodiversity day, then you have to show this very wide range of plants, and that's how you display biodiversity, kind of thing, right? So the biology teacher was at sea, so she asked, and then so we said, she came to a couple of us, and so we said, look, why don't you do this? This is in a rural environment, and the kids are all coming from farming households. So we said, look, why don't you just have the kids bring whatever seeds they have at home? Okay, let them bring whatever seeds they have at home. Let them talk about it. Maybe they can make a chart, because this is, again, very important to have display. So, you don't want to rock the boat too much, because that poor biology teacher will be taken to task. So you're sort of saying, look, why don't you get all the children to bring whatever seeds they have at home? Let them let them also learn, if they don't know something about it, learn about it from their parents, and come and share what each of those seeds are about, how they are grown, in very brief, and just make a chart where they can put little plastic bags of the seeds, and or even just stick it on the chart paper. So the kids were very excited, because you see here what was happening is, so far in the classroom they have been told that they are from a rural environment. Their knowledge really doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It is what is in the science book, it is what is in the biology book, it's all of that, it's all of that classification and all that. So for these kids, it was suddenly this thing about, okay, so they brought, and it was fascinating, and this is the dry semi-arid area. It was fascinating to see the array of seeds that they brought from, the knowledge they had of those seeds, because it came from their experience at home, it came from their environment, and the confidence with which they were able to explain it. And we were all standing at the back and watching them talk to the district education officer, and he was sort of blown away a little bit, because he didn't expect this, for one. And the kids were so confident, because they didn't have to mug up this description, the botanical name of something. They didn't have to do that. And the teacher was shocked at the effect, you see. But the point here is, there was a lot of drama, much excitement after that. But the point really is, for one, it comes from a very personal experience. It came from the experience of their parents and grandparents, and there was a value to that knowledge. Okay, and that knowledge is very legitimate. There is so much science in it. You understand how it's sown, under what conditions it's sown, which time of the year it's sown. It's just, so that is one example which I hold is very important. And for me personally, it was a big shift as well. Okay, so that is one example. So here, what is the role of the teacher, right? Or of the adult? It was to give an idea and to just let it, and these were 8th standard, 9th standard children. Okay, so what is the role of the adult? You provide an idea, you provide some sort of a stimulus, an idea, or a gentle nudge in that direction, and the children go with it. You also give them a bit of a framework. Okay, so you sort of say, okay, you can display it like this if you want, order it a little bit, so that for other reasons they're meeting some other requirement. Okay, so that is the role of the adult. You've stepped back. The children have done everything. They've come with the knowledge. They've sort of shared the knowledge. So the role of the adult is really not sort of shaping every move of theirs. It's like, for example, when we send children, when we take children out for a nature walk or a field trip or whatever it is, many times we're telling children what to look for. When we go to that village, or when we go to that forest, or when we go to that shade of trees, or when we go to that lake, you need to look for this. No, you don't. And the second experience was much more, that's for older children. This was 11th and 12th, which Vishnu, you are familiar with that experience. I think I've shared it with you, is to actually get, and we were talking a little bit about it, like when children get older, and if for some reason they have not had a direct experience or an immersive experience of sorts, and this is not children in the government school, this was children from an urban school. We took them on a field trip which was part of a 2-week thing that we always do with 11th standard children. And we took them to the Godavari area, to the Adivasi area there. And they went down the boat on the Godavari, and we stopped at various villages, and they had conversations. So, and through these conversations, they came to know about the reality of the Polavaram Dam, which it was an incredibly moving experience. It was an incredibly emotional experience as well, because people were going to be inundated, and their villages were going to, I mean, they were going to lose everything that they had. Now, many of the children were moved to tears, and we came back. But the thing was, there is an emotional experience there. But when we came back to the school, the point was, how do you translate that experience and what you've seen in the field and what you've learned in the field and the questions you've asked, et cetera, how do you comprehend that, right? What is the learning that you have distilled from it? Now, so we, as the facilitator or as the adult who had accompanied them, it was my job, and it was, to sort of get them to actually articulate what happened there, right? Now, one of the things is, they could have just written a report and presented it to the whole school, but the kids wanted to actually, and these are all 11th standard children, they wanted to share it with the rest of the school. So the option was to either make it into a story and share it, or any other thing that they wanted to. And they chose to do a mix, because some of the kids were very good at theater and at presenting verbally. The others were good at sketching. Some of them were more comfortable writing. So it was a kind of a, what we call multimedia sort of a presentation. But it was not just what the children saw and experienced. We sat down and we constructed what came out of it. What does it mean in the larger context of development? What does it mean? So there were a lot of questions that were put out there in terms of what is the meaning of development in this context? What is from an ecological perspective, from the perspective of people's livelihoods, and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to say is that here the role of the adult was, there is the experience, there is also facilitation of reflection and abstraction and learning from it and documenting it and sharing it, because that whole process of presenting it to somebody else also allows you to articulate in a different way. It brings a certain clarity in your articulation. So I think I'll stop here. I mean,
so
this
it's
goes on forever.
Yeah, fascinating. So it's not just the experience, but also the processing of it and making it a part of yourself, and which is why it remains, right? Like Sukanya's Black Hen or your Polavaram trip. So I'm going to throw this open to questions. We have about 15-20 minutes at the most. So parents and other people on this call may have a few questions. So if somebody has a question, you could just unmute yourself, start your video, and ask your question. Anybody have a question? Okay, so till somebody comes up with a question, maybe Soumya, if you can talk a bit about the role of adults in providing.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, can you hear me? I had an issue with my
frozen
other account.
Small frozen face.
Yeah. So Soumya and Radha, hello.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yes,
hear you.
now.
Yeah. Okay. So in these pandemic times, I mean, it looks like, where do we go for it?
So I think, Soumya, Vivek seems to have a question on how do you design experiential learning.
Right.
Wait for.
So the question is, how does one provide?
Muted. Right.
Yeah. Vishnu, there's a question from Vivek. So maybe we can take.
Yeah. Maybe you can answer this question and go on to Vivek's question.
Yeah. So Soumya, you want to go ahead and take it for the younger children?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. So I think some of it has been been sort of demonstrated in the examples that both you and Sukanya provided. The role of the adult, for example, in Sukanya's Blacken example, as a book to read and as as somebody to sort of slightly mercilessly break open an egg every 4 or 5 days and look at it and talk about it and probably note the changes in some sense and bring it, highlight it and mention it so child knows what to look for, kind of thing. So I think the adult's role actually is quite different from one set, from one age band to another. And I think, but I think there are some common threads through all of them. One would be that it is important to walk that fine line where you're sharing your love for what you're working with, or what you're showing, or seeing, or observing, or smelling, or touching, or whatever, or recording. But to allow the child his space, like Radha, like you said, not to say that you look at this and look at this when we go to the lake and come back, but to allow the child his own sort of.
I think we've sort of lost.
Yeah.
So Radha, if you can.
Why don't I just take Vivek's question? They're quite specific. How do you design? So he says, rather, if you can explain it for older kids, maybe 9 to 12, the grade. So Vivek, the thing with older kids, experiential learning of various at various in various locations, I would say. Okay, so let me take, for example, a very simple one for 9th to 12th grade. Even when you, even if you're going on a sort of a nature walk from an ecological perspective, right? So you can either design it outdoors, okay, but all experiential learning does not have to be outdoors. You can also have experiential learning designed for within. Say, for example, now, since we're talking about the pandemic, Vishnu had just started that question about the pandemic. So for older kids, right, the experiential learning can also be through the process of reading and discussion. Okay, it can, you can immerse yourself in a given situation, even through the process of reading, but also through the process of physically being engaged in activity at home. Okay, I want to take the pandemic example because there are a lot of questions about that. You know, when in the non-pandemic situation, people say, oh yeah, you have the outdoors, you can take them on a nature walk, you can, you can design an experiment where they're engaging with somebody else, you can do all of that. But in a pandemic, what do you do, right? So, for example, if you want to understand lives, livelihoods, socio-economic, ecological connections, okay? If you are in a non-pandemic situation, you can design it in such a way that children actually engage through conversation where the questions are sort of broadly designed, okay? And where they engage with a group of people. That's one way to design it. And I've done a lot of that, not just in a rural setting, but even in an urban setting. It's very possible to do that. But in a pandemic sort of a situation, you can do the same thing, right? But you don't, because you're not able to get out, you can do it even through conversations at home. You can do it through conversations of people who work or live in your own community. It's very possible to do that, to try and understand. And also as parents, right? I mean, the engagement is much more with parents when we are in a pandemic situation. We're reading things in the newspaper, or we're reading of instances that are happening in the world or in the country. To pick one of those and to actually take it apart and try and understand, you know, what is really happening here. So here the experience is a little bit different. Okay, it's not about, you may not be physically in that environment. Okay, you're not physically engaging with the living world in that sense, but you are engaging at a different level. It's not merely an intellectual exercise, okay? Because the adult is engaging through questioning, through trying to understand what is the child making of that particular incident, right? So that is one way of doing it. With the younger children, what I just did recently was to even get them to, and this can be done even with older children, is to get them to actually look out of their window or their balcony or, you know, wherever, some sort of a space where they can look out at something and to actually make observations using as many senses as possible, your eyes, your ears. And this also comes to, with little children, it's actually very easy to do that because they're very excited. Okay, they want to sort of note down what they've seen. Older children can get bored, okay, because they're sort of looking at you saying, what are you asking me to do? I mean, this is just so boring to sit out there and, to watch something, right? But to actually design it in such a way that they can engage with it meaningfully. Why am I asking you to do this? Why are we just sitting here and watching what is happening in the world around us? But to engage in conversation through this process. Okay, that's something that can be done during this pandemic situation. In a non-pandemic situation, I would actually design a scenario where you're physically going out somewhere. You as the facilitator have an understanding of that situation. So there is a framework within which you are getting the children to engage with somebody, say with the community or with a bunch of people or with the natural environment. But you are stepping back. You're letting them go and explore. Okay, so you are not telling them what to do. And in fact, with older students, with older children, you can, it's very useful to leave it much more open-ended. So for example, if you're out, in a natural environment, to sort of let them experience some things on their own. Okay, because in the beginning, you're going to get responses back like, I've got problems with mosquitoes, I'm allergic to this. So you are going to get responses like that. But to sort of say, no, it's okay, go ahead, explore. So you step back and you let them explore, but you have defined the boundaries to some extent. You've said, okay, this is where you can go, but let them figure out and let them find out ways for themselves. So you don't tell them where to go and what to look at. And again, the kind of questions that you're using for older children will be a little bit more nuanced in terms of you're asking them to look for relationships. You're not asking them to look for the obvious. You're getting them to get an understanding of the connection or the relationship between that physical environment, between people who are living there, between anybody else or the young people themselves, how they use that particular environment. So the questions are much more nuanced for older children when you are in an external environment. And also when they're engaging in conversation with people to understand the layers. So you help them design some of the questions, but you let them conduct it. And before you take them out, you also explain to them, you also sort of together with them. I mean, this is very important, I find, is to have a collective set of so-called rules of engagement. To work with them and say, how are we going to be when we are outside, when we are in that social setup or when we are in a natural setup? How are we going to be? How are we going to be with each other? How are we going to be with that natural environment? So while you create certain boundaries, you put down certain rules, you also have to provide adequate space for young people of that age group to explore. And in a COVID, I mean, like a pandemic or a lockdown or this kind of a situation, I think we have to look for experiential learnings in a completely different setup, and it's possible to do that. Yes. Sorry, I sort of rambled a bit there. But.
Yeah, no issues. Thanks, Radha. So there are a couple of questions. So one question is from Manish. He asks, how does one sort of align this experiential learning with the fact that you have a curriculum? There is a board, there's a board exam. So yeah, any of you can take this question.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to go if anybody else. Because
that's the easy question, Radha. So you
very easy question. Yeah, I know. Because you have. I mean, I work with ICSE, ISC board, state board, and central board. Okay. So see, again, as an adult, as a facilitator, no, I mean, we have to find and even if you're trying to transact, I use the word transact curriculum because I see it as that. Even if you're just transacting a curriculum, there are many things within that curriculum which, as a as a teacher and as an adult, you can actually take out and provide experiential learning with. Okay, so I mean, some of the experiments that we've done as part of GenWise, you know, both Sukanya and many of the other mentors have done. Those are all parts of experiential learning, where you take out a particular example. I mean, I'll take a biology example. Okay, so all across all boards, you'll be studying. You will study some common concepts. Okay, whether it is photosynthesis or whether it is leaf arrangement or whether it is fruit fly, take a fruit fly system. But often what happens is you are in an experimental setup. Okay, you set up something in a controlled condition in a laboratory. But you can get children to explore the fruit fly at home. You can get them to leave a banana skin, and you'll have lots of fruit flies. And you can cover, you can angle the bottle in such a way that the fruit flies go into the bottle. So you have the bottle against the banana, fruit flies go to the banana. You can angle the bottle in such a way that the fruit flies go in, and then get the children to bring the fruit fly back to class. Okay, so there is an engagement that is already happening, and they are not in an environment which has already been set up for them. The same thing with exploring, looking at structure of leaves. The same thing with trying to understand photosynthesis, right? So you can actually pick a concept from your textbook, and you can turn it into, I've done something very simple, like for a younger class, for example, setting curd. You know, you get children to set curd. We've done other things, like we've gone with children, got them to swab with gloves on, got them to swab the inside of toilets and have them smear on potato slices, and get them to swab a computer top and rub it on potato slices. Okay, and then they see the difference in the kind of microorganisms that grow. But there is a very different way of learning here, because you're sort of comparing and saying, oh my god, the keyboard had more microorganisms in the inside of that toilet bowl. Yes, but did the lady who was cleaning the toilet, had she added Harpic before you went and took that swab? So there are so many questions that you can ask. So doesn't matter. I mean, I personally feel, and having gone across all three curricula, you can actually design very simple ways of what we call learning from experience, irrespective of the board. Yeah.
Okay, so we need to close in 3-4 minutes, but there are 2 more questions, and we can maybe take up both these questions. So one is from Parul. She asks whether experiential learning would work better in groups. She feels that single individual children may get bored. So any quick thoughts on that?
I think mostly it is true. Groups work great for various things. Apart from the boredom and all that, you learn to interact with your peers. You need to cooperate. You need to be democratic and learn not one person to hog the whole thing. Listen to everybody's opinion. Secondly, you compare data across groups, which is a very useful thing, because I'm talking from the point of view of science, which I've done, and I think it's like a mini research environment in that sense. Like you do your group thing, you present to other groups, which is something that already articulating makes your ideas come clearer together. Second, you compare against groups and see whether you've gotten the same results. If you're doing the same thing, whether your results differ, whether they agree. If they differ, there's a discussion around why they differ. So there's a lot of rich stuff to be gleaned from working in groups, and I think it's very, very useful. Not to say that individuals, it's not possible, but I think groups are a very powerful way of getting this across. It also gives you an opportunity to teach them how to, respectfully differ, or not to get personally vicious about we got the most highest number and you got the least number, and all of that. Many, including social interactions and scientific understanding is enhanced, and that was my experience. Yes.
Yeah, I would.
Thank you, Sukanya.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. So
Completely.
the last.
There is one thing here when you talk about single child get bored or uninterested, it's also, you know, very many times when you go out as a family, and if children don't have siblings, then there again there is an experience, and then there is a learning there, but that needs to be sort of processed in conversation. You know, the adults who are accompanying the child, there needs to be that engagement. Otherwise, the meaning of that experience may not be completely sort of understood or learned, or the learning from it may not be complete. Yeah. But yeah, group learning is always.
Yeah. So the last question from Santosh is, what about higher level topics like genetics or algebra or atomic structure theory and so on? So where does experiential learning fit into the scheme of things in that? Sukanya,
Adda, would you like to say? So I don't know about genetics. I think there is.
I can say something. Yeah. But you go ahead. Yeah.
I think atomic theory and algebra. I think you cannot look for experiential learning everywhere, and it's not also right to do that. I think at some point you have to admit that algebra is an abstract subject, and you have to learn it with abstract thinking. And I think using the anchor of always going back to something that maybe it helps, at lower classes, but I think an atomic theory is again, something very non-intuitive. It's beyond our experiences, it's models, so you have to accept it as such. However, I would say that if you have done, it's not a linear process. So if you've done experiential learning exercises in other things, it overall enhances your ability to question or not to accept, or be more bold in the sense that, not look for always answers at the back of the book. So it's like in an abstract sense, it enhances, but I think every subject cannot have. One has to just accept that. And
talking about genetics, at a molecular level, there is what Sukanya said is absolutely spot on in terms of what experiential learning allows you to do. And Soumya referred to it earlier when she was sharing her opening comments as well, that, what it allows you to do is to expand your way of thinking and learning and comprehending. So in that sense, the process of abstraction, and when you have abstract concepts, particularly, at a molecular level, when you're sort of looking at it, say, when talking about genetics, genetics, you can do experiential learning with genetics by actually physically doing things and watching change over one generation to the next. So whether you use microorganisms or Drosophila systems or Moina, any of those you can actually easily see, but at a molecular level, right? At a molecular level, the ability to imagine, the ability is at a very different, and like Sukanya said, absolutely. The thing is not to have experiential learning everywhere, but the thing is, what does experiential learning do for you? What does it do for your learning process? And why is it so important as a part of the learning process? It doesn't have to be at every stage. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, sorry, I'm sure Soumya had a few things to say, but I'm going to, we are already 5 minutes past the time. So I want to say some things for 2-3 minutes and close this session. Very interesting, and I hope we will do more sessions on this. So one thing is that I would say that active engagement with learning is even more important than experiential learning. Experiential learning is, of course, very important at a certain age. As things get abstract, it's not always possible. Having said that, there are many interesting resources even on these higher order topics. For example, if you're interested in neuroscience, there is a website called Patient HM. So Patient HM was one of the first cases in neuroscience where there were very interesting things happening. And the images of all the brain slices are available on the web. You can go look at those things, and newer discoveries are happening by looking at those brain slices, right? And there is a website called Jove, J-O-V-E. There are very equipment which you cannot afford. You can actually go and look at those things. So it's not that experiential learning can happen with everything or is even desirable, but active engagement. And I want to stress this active engagement. See, what we've spoken about so far is how can we do experiential learning? We have this board exam, we have this curriculum. But what we are not talking about is the biggest risk for a learner. The biggest risk for a learner is that learning gets disconnected with life. Right? So Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, the venture funding firm, he says that the most dangerous thing you learned in school was how to crack exams. Right? Because the moment all your energies or most of your energies are devoted towards cracking exams, you think that success in every field happens like that. So people come to Paul Graham all the time saying that, what do you think about this pitch? Will it get us the funding? The goal of an organization is not to get funding. Funding may be a means to get to your goal. So the goal is to actually create value for customers. And these people are from Yale and Harvard and Stanford and all of that. But the problem is that they are tactical towards cracking exams. So so we're not saying that experiential learning happens everywhere, but this divide between learning for life and exams, if as a parent, as a school, as parent school organizations like us, we can work to keep that motivation on for actual learning, engagement with life, that we feel is, extremely important. And we've seen a lot of children who get switched off because it all seems so far away and disconnected. And that is the biggest risk. So on that note, we would like to close and stay tuned. Our next from the next month, we'll be doing 2 Addas a month. Please send us your suggestions. You can write to me at Vishnu, VISHNU at GenWise.in. So please share your suggestions on what are the topics you would like to have Addas on. So yeah, and Meera says active learning is experiential. And I fully agree, because the way you're processing it is still experiential, even though outside, there is no physical engagement with something. So thank you all. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
So Soumya, you are the host now. So you could stop the Facebook live stream.
Yeah.
So look at the 3 dots at the bottom and yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
how does one do the Facebook live stream with the Zoom? This is something to learn.